information about FFA parliamentary procedure. They are the opportunity to have possession of Minneapolis, and I'm sure they will talk about that much more information. The middle school slide has to do with the Smart Girls Rock program that occurred at the Menomonie Middle School. 206 to 8th grade girls in for 20 different step grades. That's the sort of thing with my daughter really enjoyed that. Our football festival, giant slides, they will go up.
Any questions or comments on that? Because I'd like to say this is a great, really important, well, I think we have any sense of when you move it off to the public, any coming
You need to hold the microphone closer to your mouth.
Her name is Ruthie. She's a transgender girl. That means when she was born, everyone thought she was a boy. Until she grew a little older, old enough to tell everyone that she's actually a girl. Girl is Ruthie's gender identity. This is Ruthie's brother, Xavier. Xavier is a cisgender boy. That means when Xavier was born, everyone thought he was a boy. And as he grew older, it turned out everyone was right. He is a boy. Boy is Xavier's gender identity. There are so many different ways to be a boy or a girl, too many to fit in a book, but not everyone feels like either a boy or a girl. Non-binary is a helpful word that can describe a kid who doesn't feel exactly like a boy or a girl. This is Ruthie's friend Alex. Alex is both a boy and a girl. When Alex was born, everyone thought Alex was a girl, but Alex is both boy and girl. This is Alex's gender identity. This is Alex's friend. JJ is neither a boy nor a girl. Ever since JJ was very little, they never felt exactly like a boy or a girl. They just felt like themselves. This is JJ's gender identity. Alex and JJ are both non-binary. Just like there are many different ways to be a boy or girl, there are many different ways to be non-binary, too many to fit in a book. Some kids don't feel exactly like a boy or a girl. They feel like neither. Some kids feel that their gender identity isn't always the same. It's often changing. And even with all these possible ways to be, some kids don't feel any of the words they know fit them exactly right. There are a never-ending number of ways to be yourself in the world. Whether you feel like a boy or a girl, both or neither, or if you describe yourself another way, that is your gender identity. Your gender identity might match what people thought you were when you were born, or it might not. See, when you were born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. What a baby's body looks like when they're born can be a clue to what the baby's gender will be, but not always.
Thank you. And second, we have Josie Pillman.
My name is Josie Pillman. My address is 235 3rd Avenue East, Knapp, Wisconsin, which is in the Menomonie School District. Dr. Zadowski, members of the board. This book is more dangerous than the ice and snow roads that we drove on today. I once heard of a southern gentleman who liked his chicken soup, but he often said he needed to know the cook really well. He loved his Aunt Stella's chicken soup. Why? Because she was meticulous to take out every bone. We have a situation in the Menomonie School District where the librarians are allowing gender identity books to infect our school libraries. They are accommodating the culture of the LGBTQ worldview. Wrong is called right and right is wrong. This is happening in the libraries of our very youngest children. How have these bones gotten into the soup? As a school board, we must realize that our institutions that teach our education professionals have been indoctrinating our educators for some time. The institutions, I'm talking about universities, even teach how to skirt around the moral views of parents. As a school board, we can hire teachers of character who will correct wrong teaching. They can still teach that 1 + 1 = 2. They can still teach that the LGBTQ agenda is wrong. It teaches that love is lust, lust is love, and that human sexuality is about recreation, not procreation. The parents, grandparents, and community members have entrusted the school district with the fearful task of educating our children. We want the district to hire professionals of character and courage enough to correct when necessary, and courage enough to stand up to the LGBTQ agenda, call it wrong, and remove this wrong teaching. It is not truth. Sadly, when evil books have been exposed, not one person in the process has had the courage to pick out the bone. Not all ideas are good ideas, especially for little ones with no discernment. We must not think that there is something wrong with choosing to hire the Aunt Stellas. Then the bones will be stopped at the gate, so we wouldn't need to pick the bones out of our soup. I'd like to say, this is indoctrination, this is education. We want education. Thank you.
Thank you. And on to revenue and expenditure reports for the month of October 2022.
Leah, go ahead.
I'll cover the revenue report first if you'd like to open that. For our general fund, 10, we received in $134,510.97 in local revenues. In Fund 21, our gifts donation account, we received in $40,206.75. And in Special Education Fund 27, we haven't received in any of those revenues.
You're done, Leah. Go ahead.
We haven't received it in any Fund 27 revenues yet. November is when our first special education aid payment is made, so that's ordinary at this time. And then notes for October is that the general equalization aid payment certification was made on October 15th. The expense report by function for Fund 10, we're at this year at 19.06% compared to 20.19% at the same time last year. And then Fund 27, we're at 18.49 compared to 19.06. And Fund 50, food service, we're at 19.07 compared to 21.93. Nothing out of the ordinary for the month, just timing of bills is the only difference noted there. And then the last report, the expenses by object, and this is covering all funds. Total through the month of October, we're at 18.70% compared to 19.69%. So overall costs are slightly down, but again, we have that one timing of bill payments, and then we have seen a slight increase in retiree health claims as well. Any questions?
All right, then moving on to the monthly employment report for October.
So this is a standard report the board reviews each month. Unless there's any questions, we can move on.
But I guess, I know we were looking for a number of paras. Where are we sitting at now?
Sam?
Yep. We currently have one position that we are looking to fill. Otherwise, everything else is filled.
Any other questions or comments? All right, then let's move on to the consent agenda. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. We have Carl and Dave. A motion and a second. One thing I'd like to say before we approve this, last month at the school board conference, or a meeting here in town, they had a how to run effective meetings conference prior, and one of the things that they talked about, that I asked about specifically, was many of us have been abstaining if we weren't at a meeting where the minutes are in this particular packet, and they said that that really wasn't necessary to do. unless you felt like there was something controversial and maybe it would be, you would be breaking a tie or something like that. So not necessarily to pull it out, but to abstain for that purpose. So I just thought I'd share that quickly with all of you, because I know I for one have been doing that, and they said not a big deal. So it makes it easier on Jenny if we keep it in as one pack.
I believe the exact quote is because I really matter.
I think that's it. I think that's
For anybody who's wondering, you're talking about the regional meeting that was hosted by the Wisconsin School Board Association?
That's exactly what I was talking about. All right. Any discussion? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the consent agenda?
Carl.
All right.
I would want to just highlight with those donations, 1,300 Anne Marie Foundation to the high school science and physics department for a cart system, and $4,500 from 3M for a CNC router. That's pretty cool, pretty awesome, and I think we should publicly mention that collaboration between us and like 3M in our community, that benefits our students immensely. So thank you for those donors that are helping our kids.
Thank you for that, Carl. And I am going to read what is included in the motion. So it would include the minutes from October 10 and October 24, 2022, the financial reports, checks in the amount of $2,209,360.53, cash receipts in the amount of $155,050.89 in October of 2022. The donations that Carl mentioned, and as he said, thank you very much to those who've donated, the Anne Marie Foundation and 3M, for a total of just over $5,000, almost $6,000. And then we have safety drills from River Heights and Oakland, and then a special ed agreement with another district, and then all of the attachments to the safety drills, the minutes, and so forth. So with that, let's take a vote. We have a 7-0 with a 1 not present. It's not. Nothing came up for Mark?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll have an 8 with 1 not present. 8-0 with 1 not present, motion passes. And let's move on to the personnel consent. Entertain a motion to approve. Rachel on the motion and Mark on the second. Any discussion here?
Charlie, I would just like to make mention that this includes the retirement of Michelle Closer, our school nutrition director. She'll be retiring at the end of the school year. This is her 10th year in the school district, and she's done a marvelous job. We've talked about this over and over through our board meetings about how great our food services are here and the quality of the food that our kids get. I'm very pleased that Mrs. Closer has been planning for this. I think she does have a good succession plan in place, and she's letting us know early enough that we'll be able to make sure we can, have the smoothest transition as possible as we get through the school year and start getting ready for 2023, 2024. The other piece was a bit of a surprise. We received notice that Lisa Buller, a fifth grade teacher at Wakanda Elementary School, will be resigning here at the end of the month. She has had a different employment opportunity outside of the field of education, public education here in Menomonie, so we wish her well. There will be liquidated damages for that contract being broken. However, we thank her for her years of service in the school district.
How difficult is that going to be to hire?
Well, it's not going to be easy. I know Sam has already got someone lined up for the rest of the semester, and then we'll hire someone for second semester. But yeah, having someone leave mid-year is not an easy thing for the students or for the district.
On the nutrition director position,
I'm glad you mentioned this, but, having a kind of succession plan in place, it's a really crucial role. I think one thing that Michelle's done extremely well is build relationships with local farms and, providers. And so making sure those relationships are maintained, and we have that include local supplies and local producers.
Good idea.
Those are certainly big shoes to fill.
Absolutely.
Michelle's an RD, right? She's not.
Any other discussion here? Okay, so. Roll call. Okay.
Rachel Henderson. Yes. Mark Hillman.
Yes.
Carl Palmer.
Yes.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Yes.
Charlie Schwartz.
Yes.
Gabe Smith.
Yes.
Dominique Stewart.
Yes.
Dale Welke.
Yes.
So the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to discussion items. Discuss the results of the school perception survey.
Okay, so board members, you have the school perception survey in your background packets. This was presented to the school district staff in October. October 13th, we had our consultant from school perceptions come and share the information with our staff. And in terms of participation, 268 of our staff members took the survey for a 58% participation rate. And in looking at the results of the survey, obviously it asked a lot of different questions and we received some very good information. But from a district standpoint, was very excited to see how high the district scored in a lot of different areas. A few areas particularly that the district scored high in was how employees felt their relationships were with their coworkers, that they felt safe at work, that we are doing a good job educating our students, and that students are being respected for their values and beliefs. Students are being supported from diverse backgrounds, and there's equitable opportunities for students to learn and experience success. Some of the takeaways that were mentioned in the survey that we think we can improve upon, and I was happy to see that a number of these items are very well aligned with district goals that we've already identified, but there's other areas here that I think we can take away from. There was some concern related to technology access. And I think this is well aligned with the improvements that are expected with upcoming network upgrades, staff device refresh, and classroom display replacements. Concerns related to workload, and this was a concern last time we did the survey as well. We're hoping that improvements can be expected with continued recovery from the pandemic, lowering the workload on our classroom teachers and all of our school employees. We are looking at our calendar, and that's in the agenda tonight. The school district calendar, we're looking at ways to potentially make the calendar a little bit more friendly for staff and for our families. And then also, if we make those technology improvements discussed in the first bullet item, we think that could also help concerns related to workload. And then also student discipline, looking at our student discipline programming. That goes into the next bullet point about school discipline policies and procedures. And in talking with Tony Kowalski, our Director of Student Services, we are expecting improvements that will continue to get better with recovery from the pandemic. We think there's some opportunity in how we define our Tier 2 behavior interventions, shifting SEL focus for our youngest learners, and the consideration of possible programming changes and potentially even having staffing additions related to our SEL and behavior programming. Employee compensation is something that is always a fine point for us each year. I know Samantha Hoyt in our HR department has worked with our staff closely, and I think it's something we're going to have to work closely again. I think we all know that inflation has been an issue across the country, and people in public education are not immune to those concerns. So we're hoping that we'll be able to work closely with our staff and develop compensation recommendations for the 23-24 school year that will help alleviate this concern. And then finally, meeting students' SEL needs, social emotional learning needs. Again, we're hoping that the continued recovery from the pandemic will make an impact there. I think we're all moving forward, but I think there's especially look at our younger learners, there's been a lot of studies and anecdotes, especially like these, kindergarten, first grade, second grade classes. Those kids miss out on a lot of socialization during the pandemic. There's a lot of catch-up work that continues to need to be done there, a lot of development that may have been lost. And then just how we do things, shifting our focus of the 4K program and PK summer school offerings to more of an SEL program. Perhaps starting kindergarten with a heavier emphasis on SEL programming, and then the consideration of possible programming changes and staffing additions. And again, this goes to this climb program that Tony and her team are investigating. So those are some of the key takeaways from the survey. I'm sure board members, you've had your opportunity to look through it as well. In your packets, I also shared brief summaries that our building principals put together. I appreciate the work that they did when they looked at their building-specific data, identifying celebrations, then also identifying areas where improvement can be made. Comments, questions? Sorry for some of the stuff right there. I'm doing the best I can.
Just for the record, SEL means social emotional learning.
Yes.
Because it's an acronym and a lot of the notes that we know it, but the rest of them do not know
I know I said it twice. I could have said it more.
that. Well, I didn't hear you say it out, so.
Oh, okay.
So he said it.
That's all right. Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
I think one thing that struck me is the two main points I split up into the pay responses, the reason that the actual written responses, those are just the numbers. The pay responses, I think, are very direct. And also how that links with the SEL and behavioral issues for students. I mean, if people feel they're a little bit overworked, a little bit undercompensated, it affects the stress levels. And if you're working with students who need a lot of emotional support, you need patience and calm and the space to think about how to solve the situation, right? So I think that's one thing that we really have to think about is that the compensation and the workload is tied to the student health issues, right? You really need that mental capacity to think about how am I going to handle the student, how am I going to resolve the situation when they don't end up, either despising school or having some sort of behavioral consequence. So I think those trees integrate package, the compensation, workload, and student emotional development is important.
And relating to that, one thing I wondered about was a couple of the comments that were related to benefits and pay really specified support staff as being the positions that were, where the pay was particularly wanting to get support needs. And I wondered about that with this relationship to the social emotional needs of students. And how many of those kids who have the higher needs are spending a lot of time in the day with support staff or marketing staff, and what the impact is on that.
And I think, and Sam and I have talked about this, I think it may be worth it for us to follow up with some additional questions about compensation. Is it a matter of, boy, we're really busy and we feel like we should be being paid more? And just, public education in general, not paid enough for public education. Is that the feeling? Or is it, boy, I'm doing this above and beyond and there's really no recognition for that? Or I feel like I'm a salaried employee or I'm an hourly employee. And I think there's some additional questions that we can ask. And Sam and I have already actually been in communication with school perceptions. And I think that's something we plan to do here over the next several weeks.
On that point, someone actually emailed me earlier this week noting that I have not followed up on the details. I haven't fact checked this, but the email suggested that two local districts in our area have recently increased their pay for subs. And so now we're not as competitive versus some other districts.
Yeah, I know Claire just really bumped theirs quite good.
So these are the same questions as prior surveys, is that right?
No, this is a streamlined survey. School perceptions changed the survey that they used in previous years.
So we have
So this will be more of a baseline, a post-pandemic baseline for future years to compare to.
Were any of the questions from prior where we could trend any of them to see if there's been change?
I don't know that, Carl.
couple of things crossed my mind. One was, as far as respondents, almost a third of the respondents were from the high school. So as we look at aggregate results, it's really skewed towards the high school. And so the building-specific reflections were helpful because those building leaders had time to dissect their own building responses. And one of the themes in there across most of the sites was staff feeling appreciated, recognized as a huge opportunity. And that might be something, I mean, you guys worked that out, but I think it's always that issue of, do you recognize people how you want to recognize them or how they want to be recognized? And so I think we're doing a good job of that. I like the spotlights on the staff. I enjoy that because I don't know everybody, but I'm wondering if we need to be asking the staff, how do you want to be recognized? Is there ways we're missing as a district in celebrating all the work you're doing? And that was just an observation I had that way, but.
To follow up to Carl's question, and maybe this is for Sam, I don't know, but just real roughly, I don't want to put you really on the spot, but what percentage of staff are at the high school? I would think it would be almost a third, would it not?
I would say yes.
Yeah, the breakdown of the responses was actually pretty well delegated compared to our staff percentages. And I know I received, Dale actually had communication with me concerned about the response rate. And certainly we would love to see 100% response rate, but what we heard back, because I felt the same way, that I felt the response rate may have been lower than what we had desired. But what I was told is that it's actually a pretty good response rate. And in terms of being able to have a reliable response, I followed up with school perceptions on it. Let me just pull this up here. It said, actually the average response is 23% for their company average on their surveys. And they feel a strong conclusion can be made from anything with a 10% return or better. So they actually felt our response rate was pretty good.
Do they share benchmarks with us for this survey from others who've taken it since the pandemic?
They're still developing their benchmarks. And we remember we took this right in September too. So we're certainly one of the earlier adopters of this survey.
Is there a way to bring these questions about compensation or what it means to be recognized? What people feel about compensation? Like what's the appropriate applicant? Is it things like QIC or is it other avenues that you have with staff and teachers?
Well, certainly QIC is one mechanism, but I really think a follow-up survey with a third party is important. In the past, we've done things like Google surveys and such, but there's too much trepidation in terms of anything we do in-house. And it's not just with schools, it's just the way it is right now with the employer-employee relationship in a lot of different places. So I would like to use school perceptions and do a follow-up survey. And we have a number of compensation questions we've already identified. Then I think like that question tonight about, ask staff how they'd like to be recognized, we could include that on that survey pretty easily as well. I think follow-up is appropriate.
Yeah, I think that question, or that comment came up in one of the building breakdowns about some staff members not really liking public recognition, right? And how do you recognize people without making them?
And I would be I think that's well said. I do think it's important to be cautious when reading the comment report. There are some things that are themes, but then there's also some one-offs.
Amy, you had your hand up earlier. Did you say that?
I was just gonna say that about 42% of them respond, but I see what you're saying about that, so I'm not too concerned about that as I am. But the one thing that came across too was, your educators to say, if you left your days long enough, because they don't have a chance to talk to them, like the teacher, with the student that they're working with or something. And I think that is real important. If you're trying to help a child, it's good to have a team. And so, and I can see where they would want to be compensated even for another half hour, maybe 15 minutes in the morning or 15 minutes afternoon, or whatever it takes, for them to get a chance to, have a conversation with the teacher and regarding the student so that they get the best education. A lot of times the parents are the only ones that are like one-on-one with the students, and the teachers just kind of overseeing, so it would be kind of nice to have a chance to, have these conversations.
I don't disagree that it would be nice, and we can certainly cost out that option if the board would like to see it. it's gonna be very expensive, just so you know.
Well, we can pay now or we can pay more later when students are, are told that they need.
Well, there's also the component of, does the workday, can it accommodate that conversation through other adjustments, are the right people doing the right work?
That's true.
Well, all of the above. And so, the other thing that I appreciate about these surveys is they lead us to more questions, and that's the whole point. These really aren't supposed to have the answers. They're supposed to lead us to more questions. And that's obviously what it's.
Two things I'd like to know. One, I was disappointed in the score that the school board is doing what it takes to make the district successful. That needs to be higher. And then on the good side, I was really encouraged by our school supports equal opportunities for, students with special needs, all genders, different economic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. Those scores were fairly high, so I think that was encouraging from my point of view.
I agree, that aspect you mentioned, it's really impressive. I think the survey is extremely valuable, and I really appreciate the principal's reports. I thought that was really well done to make it more specific. I am concerned about that 42% didn't respond. I mean, I'm also concerned about our public voting records as well, but I'm just not satisfied with 58%, I guess, and that's just a personal thing. And I know the company said 20% is great, but I just wondered, I talked to Lori a little bit about this, and I just wondered if maybe the timing, early in the year, I think Joey mentioned that, maybe some new staff and feel equipped. I just wondered if maybe the timing is poor in that survey. Maybe it should be later in the year. I also thought that maybe some staff felt like they could be identified, they would lose their confidentiality. And I say that because they noted grade level and their school size. So conduct, or let's say NAP would be better. It wouldn't be too hard, or specialists, and just about any position.
Before you keep going though, just so you know, people did not have to answer all those demographic
And I noticed
questions,
they didn't.
and a number of people did.
And I noticed they didn't. That's true. I don't know how we can encourage more to take part in, and maybe 58% for indicative and reflect that what 100% would say. Maybe that, but that was my take on it.
That's certainly something that we asked. If we were asking, how do you want to be recognized, we would also ask, what keeps you from filling out surveys? Of course, they may not answer the survey.
Well, I think there are things though, right? I mean, it would be, we can ask, is the breakdown on page 6 of the positions, does that match the breakdown across the district of jobs? If I were to, a wild guess, I would have is that people who are more stressed and more overworked are less likely to respond to a survey that's not required, right? And so they've got more stuff on their mind. I have not confirmed that, right? But there's all sorts of reasons people don't respond to these. I actually think that the number was, the turnout was pretty good. Having been a subject to lots of surveys like this, it's kind of a toss-up whether people learn to respond. But I think that the point you raised about the support for different cultures and backgrounds and so on, that I think is very important, and it also contrasts with the lowest score I see, which is the social emotional needs of all students being met. And so I wonder what it means to have those two things being said simultaneously. That there's questions of respect and support, and there's a question of really fulfilling the educational emotional needs of students and making sure we really do have the actual developmental progress we need for students with the support of our special education staff. So that is, I think, an interesting separation with the raising of the question.
Are you assuming that the school district is solely responsible for the social?
No, no,
and
no,
emotional
no,
needs
no.
of the students?
So exactly, I think that's sort of, asking how that score could be so different, I think is a very interesting question. I'm not proposing an answer yet.
I suspect that the supporting the opportunities is more of a process measure.
Right.
And the socio-emotional is an outcome measure of our society as a whole.
But we saw the same thing in the earlier survey, right, about, it was SEL being one of the primary reasons that teachers identify among students. Sorry.
I did have another thought, though. I was really, in some ways, a lot of these things, of course, like the comments about pay, it's not surprising to see that in the survey comments. I was really surprised, I guess, about the number of comments that dealt with discipline practices and like the feeling that they lack consistency. And one thing I was really curious about is what it looks like as students transition, for example, from their elementary schools into the middle school and then into the high school. Like if the ways that discipline is handled are dramatically different at those different levels. Or anything else, I guess, that you have to say about like what is driving that.
I think some of it's leveling, Rachel. And the principals, I see Casey, Bart, Lori back there, feel free to chime in. My take is, and Tony too, my take is that in Menomonie, we really pride ourselves in differentiation. We differentiate our instruction for our kids to try to meet them at where they're at. We also differentiate discipline. The challenge is when you differentiate, you do lose some consistency. We have a lot of special education students in Menomonie. We have a lot of students on behavior plans. We have a lot of students who aren't in special education, are not receiving special education services, yet they are receiving additional attention in behaviors. It's not favoritism or anything like that, but it's simply trying to meet that child where they're at with what they need, or what I need time. So to me, that's where a lot of it comes to. And then you throw into the fact that we have students coming to us with more social emotional needs than we've ever seen, more challenges dealing with the pandemic and everything else. Tony, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think you're very accurate in what you're saying. So we're not a zero tolerance. And we look at a child's behavior and we look at that child as the whole child, and then a decision about discipline takes place. And it's hard because sometimes administration knows something about that child that maybe even the classroom teacher doesn't know, that sways how they're going to discipline that child or not discipline that child based on what happened. And that becomes very difficult and kind of hard for some teachers to understand why an out of school suspension for 5 days didn't happen. But we might know some information about why we're not moving in that direction, where one other child may have a different discipline, but we know other information about that child. So, but that's what gets hard when you're kind of not on a kind of a zero tolerance or a plan that says this behavior results in this discipline 100% of the time. And so,
Building principles, is there anything that we missed that you want to add to the discussion? I know we talked about this.
I would just say all of our handbooks give us general guidance. And of course, there's always a range in there. And as Joe and Tony mentioned, there's always extenuating circumstances. Sometimes teachers would like to know everything about the situation, and that's just not realistic because of confidential issues. So, I think we all do a good job in our buildings of trying to let people know that we're here to support them, but we have to find a balance between reasonable consequences and not completely alienating families in that process.
I would say one other thing that adds to it sometimes is that we do try to provide teacher autonomy within the classroom. Now, that's not 100%, every teacher do whatever you want. But some teachers may say, no, don't in my classroom. Some teachers may say, yeah, go ahead and have go. Food, drink, cell phone. I mean, there's different ways that teachers run their classrooms, and with that autonomy comes inconsistency in some expectations. So we could take it all up and screw it all down and make it, nice and consistent, but I think we would lose out a lot in our system.
I really appreciate both your comments. I agree that consistency is a funny word.
Yeah, I really appreciate those responses too, and I wanted to just also clarify, like, I didn't know that, no way meant by my question, to suggest that everything should be more routine.
No,
I was
no.
simply really curious about the comments that are in here.
Curious as to what a staff member, and again, if I'm assuming this was answered by all respondents, right? This average, our schools' student discipline practices and policies are effective. So 55% said agree or strongly agree, 3.06 out of 5. So that's paras, that's teachers, that's everybody, right?
Yep.
And so I'm somewhat curious as to how a survey taker who's a licensed teacher versus a para versus office staff, what does it mean for it to be quote unquote effective? What does that mean? And does it mean that the other students in the classroom are not disrupted by the other child's behaviors? Or, I mean, what, doesn't, you know, Joe, or?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways it could be interpreted, and I think a lot of it depends on what your position is, and what it is that you're hoping, what behavior it is that you're looking for. I think a school psychologist would answer that question a lot different than a playground supervisor.
Right. I mean, is it effective to stop the behavior immediately, or is it something different?
I think it's in the eye of the beholder.
I kind of had that same thought when I was reading through, just concerns about that, because for me, I do agree that we need to deal with each child individually, so it's essentially that should work out to having your classroom managed. Like, it doesn't matter how you get there, but like, you need kids to respect each other and respect the space, and that's my concern. If that's not happening, then the differentiation doesn't need to be adjusted. So I guess that's my question too, piggybacking off of that. It's like, I can't tell from this if teachers or whoever fills this out are concerned that discipline doesn't work the same for everyone, or that we're not getting results.
I think there's some of each of that domination. And I'll be honest, I mean, there's some students that we exhaust what we can do locally. And we really try to keep students in school. We try to keep students, in programming. But there are limits to what we can do. And Tony can speak to that better than I can. But it's not like we, just have an alternative school down the road that we can reassign a student to. In fact, those options are becoming more and more limited. If a student has special needs and they have an IEP, there's very strict rules in terms of what we can do. After 10 days, there has to be a manifestation hearing, and even if you were to expel a student for behavior, you still have to provide services. Well, what kind of services can you provide? And I'm not saying that we don't need to continue to work and have expectations, but it's complicated.
That also makes me wonder, like, what is the limit? Like,
What's the limit?
right. You know what I mean? Like, if
That's a great,
people
it
are
is, that's
talking
a
about,
great question. There is no limit,
Like-
honestly.
yeah, like being disrespectful, or like in the hallways, in the classroom, like, that's a hard position for a teacher too, if you feel like, especially at the high school, I never really touched that. But, how hard do they go before, teachers not feeling safe? Do they feel like there's no fix for this? Like, that would be good, I think, to get into as well.
Well, the good news is that the safety measure came back high. I think our staff indicated that they feel safe at work, and that was 91% or something. We'd love to see it 100%, but that was a pretty high score. But to your question, it's a great question. What is the limit? And I guess what we'd like to think is we don't give up on any kid. And, but that comes with a lot of challenges. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think changing behavior, as much as we would want to say changing behavior is a quick process. It is not quick. It is actually a very long process. It can be a very long process. And I think we try really hard to engage families because it typically isn't isolated to a child in itself. It is more than just that. It's a family unit. It's extended. We try to do some wraparound teams. We collaborate with the county and outside agencies to help. Some families are not ready for that process to happen, so then we try to do our best here. Like Joe said, students with disabilities are entitled to a full day of instruction. That's an entitlement by the law. And so again, though, but I also agree with Joe. Our mission statement says all students. That's all students. It is not conditional on what a student believes or how a student acts or where a student comes from. It's all students. And so I believe that. Unfortunately, I think our alternative placement options are not great. Many of those agencies are closing their doors, which is limiting our ability. And that's why I think we have some teams that are working really hard and picking up some of that slack. But changing behavior is hard. It is not an easy task. And so, but I think we have great teams in our buildings that are willing to take on that task. It just isn't instantaneous. And I totally understand how teachers really want it to be instantaneous, but it just is not instantaneous. Changing behavior takes time.
And we could spend this entire night talking about behavior, so I'm gonna limit what I say here. This is the last thing I want to say, for now. It's easier to understand inclusion, I feel, when you're talking about learning. So you may have students that learn very quickly. You may have students, that are high achievers with the learning part, the academic part of it. And you wouldn't just not serve the students who aren't high achievers or who aren't learning as quickly. Well, we also need to be inclusive when we're talking about teaching behavior. When we're talking about those kids. I know that's not the way some of us were raised. I know that's not, might counter some traditional thinking that, hey, either fall in line or get the heck out of here. But that's just not how we do it. We're inclusive. We have an inclusive environment, not only for academics, but also for behaviors.
It kind of goes back to the book, what happened to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you read that book, and I've read it, probably read it again, it's very valuable. But it's exactly that thing, you don't want to say to a kid, what's wrong with you? You say what's happened to you. And then sometimes you can get more information. As you said, more information about those kids so that maybe you are differentiating behavior between students. Classrooms.
As we think about, how as a board we can help address some of these concerns, or at least, give the administration and staff and teachers the tools they need to solve these concerns. I'm reminded of a conversation we had back in May, I think, maybe early June. We were talking about kind of the mental health support for students and the role we have in Menomonie of having school mental health counselors, helping students and being on site and things like that. So I think it's worth thinking about how can we really kind of lean into supporting the SEL needs of these students that have pointed out from several different sources now is most effective. And of course, let's be honest, cost effective because we have a budget, problem we have to think about as well. So I have encouraged my fellow board members to think about that question of how can we really make sure that the support staff that meet these students' mental health needs and are the ones who take the burden off the teacher in the classroom who's facing a disciplinary issue, that we really kind of put as much as many of our cards in that pile as possible to give that support as much as we can. So I don't have any answers, but I think that's a bit, this keeps me up in discussion after discussion, survey and school report cards and so on, about really emphasizing SEL in this time.
And I think it's fair to say that we're spending more than $1 million a year, more than what we were spending 5-6 years ago in school counseling, intervention supports, social workers. Yeah, I mean, we've invested heavily, and even with all those investments, there's more.
Just one last question on the subject. Is this something that could at some point be put to the quality improvement committee in terms of like talking about this plan, how it ties into the promotion or that outside of school?
I think that's probably more at the building leadership team level, the principals and the building leadership team.
Just that comment about the amount of work I'm asked to do is reasonable and manageable is one of the lower things as well. And the way you said that, Joe, about, that being inclusive, not just with teaching, but with, the SEL stuff, that's resonating to me. If I'm a staff person, my day of work is one big thing. It's all mixed together. If you ask me what my work is, if a lot of it's with IEPs and with trying to get a hold of parents that won't answer the phone and talk about a discipline problem, that's work, and that's part of what this is. That's probably how I'm responding to a lot of that. It's not just, it's too much work to teach math. That's probably not the biggest burden on our staff.
Oh, no, if our teachers.
I'm just saying it out loud.
If our teachers only had to plan lessons, deliver lessons, grade papers, and report the results, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't even be talking about this right now. Jamie Vollmer's list, and Dan Paulson, I saw him the other day, he reminded me of this, and I'll have to send a note to the board members. Jamie Vollmer, he was a very successful American businessman, he sold ice cream, and he was anti-public school. Well, then he had an epiphany about how public schools take everybody, and he calls it, they take all the blueberries. In his ice cream business, if you got some blueberries that didn't meet the top quality, they just get rid of them. Well, in schools, we take all the blueberries. And he put together this list, once he had this epiphany, of what public education teachers have been expected to do going back from the 1800s until now. And it is ridiculous if you look at that list. So I'll send it out to Jamie Vollmer's list.
If you haven't read some of Vollmer's works, you really need to. It's pretty amazing the things that he has uncovered, if you will. The blueberry story alone is worth the read. The list looks like my Christmas list when I was a child and I unrolled it. It goes on like that. It's quite long. Any other discussion on this issue? Okay, let's move forward. Discussing the development of SDMA graduate profile.
So with that being said, when we talk about concerns about capacity, and when we talk about what it is we're trying to do in our schools, one exercise that some schools have undergone has been the development of a graduate profile, or profile of a graduate. There's different terminologies for it. When we were developing our strategic plan 4 years ago, we thought this might be a good idea. And with concerns that we had with the last survey about capacity, this was put on hold. And then with the pandemic, this was put on hold. And we're to the point now, I think, where we need some direction. Is this something that we're going to do as part of this strategic plan? And if we do it, what are we hoping, how are we hoping to do it? The directors, the principals, and I, we could develop a graduate profile now. I mean, the board, you guys, you could sit here in an hour and develop it, and we could come up with probably a pretty decent product. But I guess the question is, where's the real value in this? Is it the product? Is it the process? I do think we are, probably a year to 18 months away from being back in the strategic planning process, whether that be writing a new plan, whether it be refreshing the one we have, whether it be developing a graduate profile. We're more than willing to do the work. But I just want to caution that if this is something that we want to undertake, it is going to be a lot of work. And I do think if we were to do it, we want to do it right and engage parents and community members and our staff. And I guess before we dive into that head first, which we need to, if we're going to do it this year, we would need to dive in pretty quick. I guess I'd like to hear from the board. One, is this something you want us to do this year? And two, if it is, what are you hoping to see on it?
I have a question about the concept. Like how, and I'm looking at the Shelby County rate example, like you said. Copy paste this, so I'm concerned with size. Like how would this be used? I guess looking at this example, I'm thinking like, yes, this looks good, this looks right, like these are what we want our students to achieve. Does that need to be, do we need to spend time setting that on paper? And does and as part of that, like does our strategic plan already kind of accomplish this when we talk about, like especially the first two pillars of our strategic plan, which are about about students. So that's I guess my question, without knowing, my question is like, how would you use this and how slow would it be beyond the kind of living going on?
I think it helps operationalize those strategic visions, I would say. I do think there are a number of pieces of our strategic plan that translate to operations pretty easily. I think this would really be kind of committing to the final product. But I really think it's probably more about the process than the product anyway.
When you say process, what does that look like? Because to me, I'm like, I don't like reinventing the wheel, and this looks pretty good. So I'm just wondering, like, how would the process make our result much different than this?
I guess what I'm trying to say, Dominique, is I don't think adopting this or even having a lead team write one up in an hour would probably change a lot with how we do things. I think the idea is that if you engage parents, engage the community, engage the board, the teachers, and the support staff, it's a way to bring everyone together behind a common goal, a common vision. I think that's really the power of the process. The product itself, I don't think probably matters a whole lot. But that's my concern is that, is this something that we want to embark on? Because if we're not willing to invest or we're not ready to invest coming off the pandemic or whatever it may be, all the different reasons why we might not be ready, then I think we're kind of we might as well copy and paste it and be done with it or not do it.
So this Edutopia article that you linked says, unlike a mission or vision statement, a graduate profile is a document a school district or uses to specify the cognitive, personal, and interpersonal competencies that students should have when they graduate. So we grant a degree if you copy enough credits, right, and your grades high enough and you've attended enough days, we'll give you a diploma for that. But I think what this is saying is, are we providing our community, essentially blueberries in and blueberries out almost, Joe, with your earlier analogy, right? Everyone who comes in to our system is going to come back out and become our community, our society. And so it's kind of about that, isn't it? It's about, is our school also graduating people who are ready to be part of that society in the way our community envisions? And maybe asking folks who graduated 5 years ago, did you feel prepared to be out in the community in the last 5 years since you got out, type of thing?
They do surveys.
So I think this is a qualitative process, descriptive process that fills in the gaps between the measurable standardized tests and counts of credits. Is that somewhat correct, Joe, in reading this?
Yeah, I think that's a way that it can be considered. I think it's somewhat of an inventory too of what programming you have, what services you provide.
It seems like it's academics you're talking about, or was like academics, there's more like.
No, I think it's mostly that. We already captured, to be a graduate, you have to have the grade, you have to have the credits. This is that other stuff. You can have all the grades and the credits. What it reminds me of is last week, one of the current seniors asked me to write a letter of recommendation, right? And she gave me the list of all the things she's done. And I said that what I'm concerned more is this person a good citizen? Right? Do they care about people? Are they out helping to make the world a better place? Those sort of things. And I think that's what this is similar to.
Yeah, I think it's a certain level of certificate of it's not required. So I guess my question would be, it seems like a lot of work, like you say, we're already doing and all of that. It seems like a lot of work because, what do you do, you can't graduate, you can't. So it's still, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is push for that, but what meaning does it have after, once they graduate? I'm kind of thinking of.
Well, I don't think this really relates to any in particular student. I really think it's more looking at our programming, looking at our resource allocation. Gabe, I think you were going to go.
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to, Carson's thing with me very skeptical of these sorts of things because it seems like it's trying to write down something that is not already part of your process and thought process, that the documentation of it serves very little purpose. It's about the process, not the product. And so I was wondering how going through the process of thinking through what we think is important to our student, what would that change about our process? So we have a ongoing process for curriculum review that every year goes through a different English or math or whatever. We have our pillars of the strategic plan. We have discussions like this one. And so I kind of wonder, okay, so suppose that, I don't remember what the schedule is off the top of my head, but suppose the next year we're looking at, English or SEL as a curriculum review, is there a point in that process where a document or the result of a discussion would be referenced as here's how we're going to alter our literature in high school, or here's how we're going to alter our teaching of social studies or our SEL programming at the grade school level, right? So my personal suspicion is that we have great people in these roles, and their entire life expertise is a little wedge of this diagram, and I'm happy to say, that's your specialty. Mid-year curriculum review, that's fantastic. We trust you. We're going to support you, and that the sort of the fancy diagram is not nearly as useful as simply having the right people in the right positions and having them do the good work. So I'm skeptical of it as a document as being useful. I think that there may be ways to engage discussion with parents and families and teachers and the public when it might be fruitful. But honestly, I feel like it's probably going to end up with many, many hours of work and meeting organizing with very little change to the actual process. So, go ahead.
I have a question about process on that note, and I'm inclined to kind of feel the same way. So our current strategic plan goes through 2024. I assume that sometime during the calendar year 2023 that we would start the process of the next strategic plan. And I guess the reason I ask that, if I may add on my question, is that what you are trying to Joe's out was some really valuable in terms of engaging all stakeholders, parents, the board, teachers, around this idea of what we want our students to be. And I wonder if instead of embarking right now on the profile of the project that will take a lot of time and energy, and people with not just your time and energy, of course, and also how many times do we go to the community asking them to participate in something, right? Like we might wear people out. And so I wonder if a better course of action would be to start thinking about our next strategic plan and the way we would engage all of the stakeholders around the particular pillars in the next year.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think to your question about, when does the strategic plan end? Well, it really depends on where the board feels we're at. And there are we're on track with the deliverables.
Yeah.
I think we're looking really good. And perhaps maybe as we get to the end, maybe it is that the board wants to take this back in and say, you know what, maybe we need to spend time and do this as a jumpstart into our next plan. Or maybe this is inclusive of the plan itself. There's a lot of different ways it can be looked at. I guess I wouldn't look at putting this on the shelf, continuing with the work plan that we have, get to the end of this year, and as we start developing the next work plan, at that time, maybe say, okay, in this next work plan, we need to start having our next strategic planning discussion.
I feel very supportive of that type of action. I feel no sense of urgency on the point on our agenda about putting you and the rest of the other team into this project.
I'm a little concerned too that I don't know. I think building consensus at this point also I think is going to be pretty tricky. I think maybe having a little more time might not be a bad idea either. I think having consensus on what it is in terms of having a graduate profile could be quite a challenge.
But consider the survey said too about making them locate that's much on their plates. Sure. And so it might just be something that we can postpone because that's this year. It's pretty much the first, so-called normal year.
From a timing point of view, I don't really have a suggestion or recommendation whether we do it now or do it later. But I think in my mind, this is exactly what we as a board should be doing. I walk the hallway right out here, and I don't even know what classroom it was, but I'm sure that they teach math and they teach civics and everything else. But on the outside, it talked about this is a bully-free zone, right? That's kind of what this is about, right? It's about those other skills, the non-academic skills that we want the graduates of our district to have. When they leave these buildings, can they do other things other than math? How do they interact with people? How are they going to go off to college and interact with their new peers? I think it fits very well into that, and I think as an extension of the mission statement, unique needs in using the strengths of our diverse community is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Notice in the mission statement, it didn't say, we want everybody to be a straight A student, or we want everybody to be qualified as a valedictorian. It's about what kind of citizens they're going to be. I think this kind of work helps to define that, to become better citizens. So I think personally, it's an important thing that we should do. I don't want to pile more on people's plates right now, but I think as we start talking about that next work plan and about that next strategic plan, I think we need to be thinking about something like this, whether it's exactly this, different deal, but I think this is very important. And I think, to your comments earlier tonight, Gabe, I think this really plays into the social emotional learning spot of kids that will help them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my skepticism a moment ago is more about this as a separate process as opposed to integrated with the strategic plan as a whole operation. I think doing this kind of on the side is somewhat pointless. If we think about these themes as we move into planning, that totally makes sense.
Any other thoughts, discussion on that?
I think it makes fine sense to discuss, does this become a step of our strategic planning process, a component of that? I mean, they're discussing that here too. Some do it this way, some do it that way. There'd be no problem. I think there's some merit to this. I don't think it's a crisis either with everything else that's on the plate. I think before we do another strategic plan, then that's a good time to say, does this be part of that?
Okay. Then moving on to the annual free and reduced meal eligibility.
So this report comes to the board each year. Appreciate the work that Leah and her team did put forward. board members, you can see that there's been some change. Leah, could you just highlight the changes, please, for the board?
Sure, you'll see a reduction over last year of 8.14%. It's important to know, part of that equation is, for the last 2 years, sure, during the pandemic, children ate for free, and so this year now, it's reverted back to paid meals, and so anyone who had applied and qualified in the previous year has to carry over 30 days into this school year, and then they have to make reapplication October 1st. And so I know that food service and people services have done a good job trying to reach out to families and get the word out, but we still have a ways to go. I think a lot of families need to maybe fill out those applications and get it submitted for the new year.
I have a question about that. Did families submit those applications during the pandemic years when there was no cost to lunch? When there was any, I'm just curious because it seems like there'd be no benefit to filling out the application.
Well, I think it was still required.
Yeah,
Okay.
some families, we still encourage families to do that because the numbers on here do not, it helps with other services or benefits that we could get. So yes, there was still encouragement for families.
Yeah, and I totally understand why it's helpful for the school, but with that individual family.
So the 8% reduction is not that 8% of students don't qualify this year, but qualified in the past. It's that there's just less people who fill out the forms. Is that-
Well, no, it's part of the equation, it's not all of it. I mean, it's 8.14% less qualified.
Of those who.
Just
submit.
compared to those who
Is this
qualified
indicative
last
of an improvement in the financial well-being of families, or is it a paperwork issue?
Yes.
Yes, to both.
Or is it indicative of metric
It could be.
goalpost that
Either
hasn't been
didn't-
moved
they didn't
like it
apply,
should be during?
Or they applied in.
And there are families that serve directly through the state program as well. That's a factor of this as well.
Is there any other way to estimate the need, aside from the paperwork question? That we have, any, family income surveys or demographic data that people, that are, the DPI analysis collected? Do we know if this is 8% is a reasonable number or not compared to actual?
DPI does not collect information about that. I think our staff does a good job at making sure that families understand about the application. It is a change, so we have also communicated with our current agencies so that if they're working with families, they understand that there's a change in the process.
Well, I think I read in the report from Michelle that there's some balances that are so, I don't know if that's an impact on the beach or on other that makes me wonder if there are people that, we're missing out on this. And I assume you advertise and have those forms probably ready available in the school.
Yes.
So in October of 2021, 43.5% of our students qualified for free or reduced lunch. In October of 2022, 39.97% of our students qualified for free or reduced lunch. That's what it comes down to. Any other questions?
None? All right. Moving on to discussing the 2023-2024 calendar.
So we've begun work on next year's district calendar. And one thing we've heard from our staff in the past is that a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, we had 11 snow days and we had just a terrible winter. And we increased the school day a little bit so that we didn't have to bring the students back later into June. And we actually had a lot of positive feedback from our staff about the extra time in the day and how it was good in a lot of cases in terms of being able to instruct students. So the principals modify the school day once in a while. But essentially what it comes down to is we are offering our students in Menomonie more hours of instruction than what's required by the state. And when the principals go and do the calculation, it's approximately 6 days of extra instruction that we provide at the high school level, about 10 days of extra instruction that we provide at the middle school level, and almost 8 days of extra instruction that we provide at the elementary level. And that's based on the minimum. So we certainly can, we want to provide as much as we can, but above the minimum requirement by law, that's what we do. Well, that is, probably more than what we need built in for snow days. Typically, you're gonna have a couple snow days here or there. We always could make up some days if we had to, but this is probably a little bit bigger cushion than what we need. What some schools have done is they have shifted some days out of the instructional year and done kind of a jump start to the school year right at the end of August. Because state law doesn't allow us to start the regular school year until September 1st. But by doing that, by having a little bit of a jump start, there's a few things that happen. One is it provides a little bit of a softer landing for students. It would be expected that students come. You couldn't file truancy, but you'd run buses and you would essentially start your school year, 3 or 4 days early, whatever the calendar works out. Financially, that's an incentive for the district because you can count those summer school minutes as summer school instruction. So essentially, you're counting those students for those days. Your expenses are higher than traditional summer school because you're running a full bus route, but you still probably come out ahead. And then the other piece to it is that, by taking a few days out of the regular instructional year, you're providing a school calendar that is, probably a little bit kinder to staff, a number of families. Now, some families it's very difficult when there's days in the calendar year, school calendar, when there is no school, because people count on the school for daycare, meals, things like that. But, this is an option, especially when we look at that staff survey. I think it could provide us with, I figured 3 days that I feel comfortable with doing a jump start. But I guess before we get too far down this road, and certainly we're going to work with our staff on this and get staff input, do board members have any concerns about an idea like this? Do board members want to set any parameters other than, that we're communicating with staff? Any feedback that the board has on the front end of this process?
First of all, if you start school earlier for the kids, but it's not required, is that going to be an issue for those kids that come in later?
It could be, because I would anticipate that we would get going. I think it could provide the opportunity, especially at the lower levels, to prioritize social emotional learning, and more soft landing type of stuff. But I would anticipate there would be academics being done as well. So yeah, if a family chose not to participate, I do think that could impact it.
And is that going to hurt our, are we going to get a waiver to do that with the state? Or?
No.
Okay, and then the other thing is that when school gets out earlier, there's days of, keep that on.
It depends on when we work with the staff where we want to move. So let's say we move 3 days out of the regular calendar. You could take them all off the end and get done earlier, or you could build in some more breaks. I know like a number of schools, they don't go to school Thanksgiving week because attendance is so poor because of deer hunting and such. That could be the target. There's other targets in the calendar that could be strategic times off. And I'm not asking for approval on this or anything, I'm just asking for feedback. I want you involved before we get too far down the road on this.
I do like the idea of having a couple of days that would allow for more, especially the younger grades, or even like the transitioning, like the 6th grade and 9th grade, to have more time to get used to kind of establish routines and norms. That makes a lot of sense to me.
As I recall, there was a discussion that the teachers had in the kickoff this fall about, the key things like getting on their students and building your classroom forward, starting with the keyword. I think this could help engage that. I am concerned about what Amy brought up was, if students, for all sorts of reasons, stick to the real calendar, right, the official calendar, starting after September 1st, then it's, you might have a large cohort of students who feel like they walked into a party, right, and don't know anyone there. So, I think it's worth investing time. It has some subtlety to it, though.
That investigating would have to include those schools that have done this jumpstart. How would they rate it, what's going on with that? And, that calendar business is tricky, staff is gonna be very split. Ended earlier or longer than a million other proposals. And families, it seems like, accommodate some vacations, but also doesn't accommodate childcare.
The districts that I know of that have done this, I found it to be very successful, both academically and financially. They really like it. The one district that I know of, the administrator kind of drugged the community through it. I don't think they were real happy in the beginning, but I think he'd have a hard time ending it now. They really like it, so.
You get a high percentage of
Yes,
involvement.
smaller districts, but yes.
The area where you probably have the most challenge to buy-in would be in high school. However, so many high school sports and activities are going, mid-August. That's where we get a lot of complaints about, geez, we can't go anywhere as a family. My kids are doing this, and, they're already at school 3 hours a day. Why aren't we just starting?
They also have that program at the high school too, where they have upperclassmen, I don't know what it's called anywhere, but it's regular upperclassmen, the freshman comes to.
Yeah, the freshman first day with Lane Crew, that's one day.
Yeah,
We would continue that. This would just be an addition. Well, we'll work with the staff, we'll see what they say, and this way you're informed and know that at least it's an option.
I think we got to go a little bit more detail on the financials of it, because you said that you're going to get credit from the state, for that time, but you're going to be paying staff to be a higher rate. Anyway.
That'd be a wash though.
Okay, yeah.
Because the teacher contract would not change.
But what it would say for the parents, right? So I think people are very happy with the available summer program. Of course, that's optional and paid, right, to some degree. So it's.
I think a lot of parents are ready to send their kids back that last day.
That was my next question.
Well, yeah, lots of parents love to have their kids in school. So.
Well, how often do you end up, your kid goes 1 or 2 days and then it's Labor Day weekend, which is almost ridiculous, really. Got to go follow rules for a day or two and then you get a long weekend and forget everything we just told you. So if you tack a few days on ahead of time, that might be.
I don't know what you're. No. I'm not gonna go there. Forget it. Okay, that's all I need. Thank you.
All right. Items related to next meeting dates, board committees and reports. So first of all, reminder to those on committees. In December, there's quite a few committee meetings. Take a look at that calendar if you're on a committee. Make sure that you get that on your calendar. No school, November 23 to 25. Board meeting on the 28th. And then, again, all those committee meetings, our regular meeting on the 12th, and then no board meeting on the 26th. So, don't have to come back early for Christmas mark for board meetings.
And Charlie, Lori had stepped out at the beginning of the meeting just to see if anybody was at the front needing directions to come in. Mrs. Smith, I want to thank you for putting on the tour for the school board, the tour of Oakland Elementary School. Thank you for hosting us. The Veterans Day tablecloths are especially cool. Thank you very much.
We're glad to have you here, and I appreciate the people who went on the tour to see what makes Oakland unique, so thank you.
Troy, one reminder on the dates. So this week are the 2 remaining events on legislative outreach and
For school board association?
Yeah, it was not the school board association one. So tomorrow there's one, that one at Turtle Lake. I'm not familiar there. But on Wednesday is the online version of that seminar. So I intend to attend the online one on Wednesday, and I hope other people can as well. I think it's something we should discuss maybe once in December or January as we think about what to do in terms of state budget questions.
What time is it?
It is not been published as far as I know. So.
Oh, I thought it was in the evening.
Let you know if we want to do it.
Add to my calendar.
I sent the link to Jenny.
I think Jill sent it to us after the last meeting.
All right, any other discussion on the calendar then? Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Amy and Dominique on the second. Get adjourned.